So hello, Ralph Reviews It is the channel, and in this case I'm going to be reviewing Nikolai Gogol. He was a Russian writer of the 1800s, the early 1800s, and I think unjustly forgotten, although that's certainly not surprising. I wouldn't have known about him, except that at some point in my college career I decided way back in the early 80s that I was going to go to Russia, and I thought they were one of the most fascinating countries ever, so I should learn Russian literature. And I took all sorts of courses in Russian literature in translation. Why in translation, not the original language? That's a story to tell you later. So today I'm going to start with what I think is one of the funniest stories of Gogol, and this is written in 1835-36, during that time period. You know what? I'm going to let the story speak for itself. We can all look up Wikipedia and find out who Gogol was, and I'll tell you a little bit more about him later. Now, although it's a short story, it's not a super short story, so I'll read this in parts. We'll keep it to about 10 minutes in length at each segment. So without any further preface, Nikolai Gogol, The Nose. On the 25th of March, a very strange occurrence took place in St. Petersburg. On the Ascension Avenue, there lived a barber of the name of Ivan Yakovlevich. He had lost his family name, and on his signboard, on which he was depicted the head of a gentleman with one cheek soaked, the only inscription to be read was, "Bloodletting done here." On this particular morning, he awoke pretty early. Becoming aware of the smell of fresh-baked bread, he sat up a little in bed and saw his wife, who had a special partiality for coffee, in the act of taking some fresh-baked bread out of the oven. "Today, Praskovna Osipovna," he said, "I do not want any coffee. I should like a fresh loaf with onions." "The blockhead may eat bread only as far as I'm concerned," said his wife to herself. "Then I shall have a chance of getting some coffee," and she threw a loaf on the table. For the sake of propriety, Ivan Yakovlevich drew a coat over his shirt, sat down at the table, shook out some salt for himself, prepared 2 onions, assumed a serious expression, and began to cut the bread. After he cut the loaf in 2 halves, he looked, and to his great astonishment saw something whitish sticking in it. He carefully poked around it with his knife, and felt it with his finger. "Quite firmly fixed," he murmured in his beard. "What can it be?" He put in his finger and drew out a nose. Ivan Yakovlevich at first let his hands fall from sheer astonishment. Then he rubbed his eyes and began to feel it. A nose. An actual nose. And moreover, it seemed to be the nose of an acquaintance. Alarm and terror were depicted in Ivan's face, but these feelings were slight in comparison with the disgust which took possession of his wife. "Whose nose have you cut off, you monster?" she screamed, her face red with anger. "You scoundrel! You tippler! I myself will report you to the police. Such a rascal! Many customers have told me that while you were shaving them, you held them so tight by the nose they could hardly sit still." She has assumed that he cut off somebody's nose and baked it in their bread. But if Ivan Yakovlevich was more dead than alive, he saw at once that this nose could belong to no other than to Kovalov, a member of the municipal committee whom he shaved every Sunday and Wednesday. "Stop, Praskovna Osipovna! I will wrap it in a piece of cloth and place it in the corner. There it may remain for the present. Later on I will take it away." "No, not there. Shall I endure an amputated nose in my room? You understand nothing except how to strop a razor. You know nothing of the duties and obligations of a respectable man. You vagabond. You good for nothing. Am I to undertake all responsibility for you at the police office? Ah, you soap smear. You blockhead. Take it away where you like, but don't let it stay under my eyes." Ivan Yakovlevich stood there flabbergasted. He thought and knew not what he thought. "The devil knows how that happened," he said at last, scratching his head behind his ear. "Whether I came home drunk last night or not, I really don't know. But in all probability this is a quite extraordinary occurrence. For a loaf is something baked, and a nose is something different. I don't understand the matter at all." And if Ivan Yakovlevich was silent, the thought that the police might find him in unlawful possession of a nose and arrest him robbed him of all presence of mind. already began to have visions of a red collar with silver braid and of a sword, and he trembled all over. At last he finished dressing himself, and to the accompaniment of the emphatic exhortations of his spouse, he wrapped up the nose in a cloth and issued down the street. He intended to lose it somewhere, either at somebody's door, or in a public square, or in a narrow alley. But just then, in order to complete his bad luck, he was met by an acquaintance who showered inquiries upon him. "Hello, Ivan Yakovlevich. Whom are you going to shave so early in the morning?" etc., so that he could find no suitable opportunity to do what he wanted. Later on, he did let the nose drop, but a sentry bore down upon him with his halberd and said, "Look out! You have let something drop." And Ivan Yakovlevich was obliged to pick it up and put it in his pocket. The guy meant well. He was helping him not litter. He had no way of knowing, the sentry, that Ivan had dropped a nose. A feeling of despair began to take possession of him. All the more as the streets became more thronged and the merchants began to open their shops. At last he resolved to go to the Isaac Bridge, where perhaps he might succeed in throwing it into the Neva. But my conscience is a little uneasy that I have not yet given any detailed information about Ivan Yakovlevich, an estimable man in many ways. Like every honest Russian tradesman, Ivan Yakovlevich was a terrible drunkard. And although he shaved other people's faces every day, his own was always unshaved. His coat, he never wore an overcoat, was quite mottled, i.e. it had been black but became brownish yellow. The collar was quite shiny, and instead of the 3 buttons, only the threads by which they had been fastened were to be seen. Ivan Yakovlevich was a great cynic, and when Kovalov, the member of the municipal committee, said to him, as was his custom while being shaved, "Your hands always smell, Ivan Yakovlevich," the latter answered. "What do they smell of?" "I don't know, my friend, but they smell very strong." Ivan Yakovlevich, after taking a pinch of snuff, would then, by way of reprisals, set to work to soap him on the cheek, the upper lip, behind the ears, and on the chin, and everywhere. This worthy man now stood on the Isaac Bridge. At first he looked round him, then he leaned on the railings of the bridge, as though he wished to look down and see how many fish were swimming past, and secretly through the nose, wrapped in a little piece of cloth, into the water. He felt as though a ton weight had been lifted off him, and laughed cheerfully. Instead, however, of going to shave any officials, he turned his steps to a building, the signboard of which bore the legend, "Teas served here," in order to have a glass of punch, when suddenly he perceived at the other end of the bridge a police inspector of imposing exterior, with long whiskers, 3-cornered hat, and sword hanging at his side. He nearly fainted, but the police inspector beckoned to him with his hand and said, "Come here, my dear sir." Ivan Yakovlevich, knowing how a gentleman should behave, took his hat off quickly, went towards the police inspector and said, "I hope you are in the best of health." This part strikes me because a tradesman, all these tradesmen apparently are subservient, not just respectful, but absolutely servile to authority. "Never mind my health. Tell me, my friend, why were you standing on the bridge?" "By heaven, gracious sir, I was on the way to my customers, and only looked down to see if the river was flowing quickly." "That is a lie. You won't get out of it like that. Confess the truth." "I am willing to shave your grace 2 or even 3 times a week gratis," answered Ivan Yakovlevich. "No, my friend, don't put yourself out. 3 barbers are busy with me already, and reckon it a high honor that I let them show me their skill. Now then, out with it. What were you doing there?" Ivan Yakovlevich grew pale. But here the strange episode vanishes in mist, and what further happened is not known. So I think I'll stop there, because we're about to meet Kovalov, and a little explanation about why his rank matters and who he is would be a nice preface to continue. So part 2 of the nose will be the next video.